Welcome to our lesson on double attacks and forks. You know, I thought at first we could learn our lesson today in the city of Forks, Washington, but that's just a little too obvious. So instead, let's take a tour of the great city of London, England. We'll learn about forks and double attacks on a double-decker bus. Now we remember what skewers are, right? They are fantastic tactics. Great for our arsenal. But only 3 pieces can create a skewer, or a pin for that matter. Those are our rooks, bishops, and our queen. However, I got good news. When it comes to forks, everyone can create a fork. Our pawns, our knights, even our king can create a fork. And they like this. Our first stop on our City of London tour is Big Ben. Big Ben is the nickname of the bell at the world-famous clock tower, built in London in 1859. And did you know that its timekeeping is kept precise by placing actual pennies on top of the pendulum? 1 penny adjusts the time by 0.4 seconds a day. All right, let's have a look at forks. In this position, the rook is going to call check on the king. Seems logical. King steps out of the way, attacks the rook. The rook moves out of the way, attacks the bishop. And here, the white bishop is going to create a fork. A fork is a direct attack on 2 or more targets. This bishop is calling check on the king, and it's attacking the rook at the same time. This is a fork. Remember what a pin is where we have one piece has a direct attack on the front target and an indirect attack on the back target. Same with the skewer. We have a direct attack on the front, an indirect attack on the back, but a fork, however, is a direct attack on 2 or more targets. This is a fork. Let's look at this position. Very typical position. Black pushes his pawn to, good move, open the center, and white makes a mistake and castles. Now we do want to castle, but in this case it's a mistake because now black pushes his pawn to d4 and forks the bishop and the knight. One of these pieces is going to be lost. Now we all know the pawn's ultimate goal is to become a queen, right? Well, you know what? There's something else that every pawn would love to do, and that is fork the king and the queen. Wow, this king has just got sick to his stomach. Oh, how do I let this happen? And I can tell you what, this is one happy pawn. This pawn here is probably just as happy as he would be if he became a queen. So we're always looking for great forks like that. Now we've seen how a bishop forks, we've seen how pawns fork. It's time for the rook. His turn is up. Here the black knight is going to attack the white bishop on e2. Great move. White decides he wants to keep his bishop. White moves to c4 and attacks the black rook on g8. And this was a mistake, because now the black rook on g8 can create a fork. Do you see it? Right here, rook to g4, forking the white bishop and the white knight. White made a mistake here. He cannot protect both his pieces. This is a great fork. White is going to lose a piece. And now it's the queen's turn to show us how she forks. I'm going to show you a very common fork by a queen found in many opening games, especially among beginner players. I would say that if you play a lot of chess, you've either done this yourself or if you've seen this happen, you've had it happen to you. It's very common. We're going to start this game with e4, e5, very normal. And here white is going to push his pawn to f4. Now there's nothing wrong with this move, but keep in mind you've created air around your king. See that f2 square? That's a little bit of a weakness because now your king has some air. There's wind blowing around your king. He's not quite as safe as he was. But okay, let's continue. Black brings out and develops the bishop. And white thinks, I have a free pawn on e5, don't I? And white takes this pawn on e5, and that is the beginning of the end. Because now, here comes this forking move by the black queen. Do you see where the queen goes? Right there. h4, forking the king and the pawn. Now the king is in check. And the first reaction from white is to block the check. Pushes the pawn to g3. Oops, the hole is getting deeper. White is throwing the game away because now what does black do? That's right. Fork the king and the rook. Once again, white is in check, and now it's not a pawn going down, but it's a whole rook. White has already lost the game by the 5th move. Next, let's look at how a king forks. Very easy. Look at this position. The white rook on e2 says, I have a free pawn on e6. I can take the black pawn and call check. Wow. White thinks, ha ha ha, I've just won a pawn. Problem is now black has a fork. The black king steps into d7 and forks the rook and the knight. Oops. So don't ever underestimate the power of your king, especially in the end game. A king is perfectly capable of creating deadly and powerful forks, all by himself. On our next stop, we are going to the famed Tower of London, built in 1078, nearly 1,000 years ago. This place, this fortress, is the home to the crown jewels of England. This is just one exhibit. This is the Imperial State Crown, which has 2,901 jewels, including 2,868 diamonds. Wow. Some estimate the worth of all the crown jewels to be more than $5 billion. And this is the perfect place to introduce the last piece that can create forks. Your knights are the most powerful forking pieces in your army. Look at this fork. Wow. King and the queen. This is called a royal fork. Now I'm going to show you one of the most common, most popular knight forks in all of opening chess. This is probably the first opening that will defeat you in any chess tournament. If you haven't done this yourself to someone, the longer you play chess, the more often this will be done to you. Everybody knows about this. It's called the fried liver attack. Watch what happens. The white knight's going to attack the black pawn on e5. Black defends. White develops his bishop to c4. Black develops a knight, and right here the fried liver attack begins. The white knight goes to g5, and you see what white's plan is here. White is double attacking what square? f7. Look at that f7 square in black's side. Two pieces attacking that square. Now black has to be careful. If you're black, you need to know what white's plan is. Let's say black develops his bishop. And here white is going to create the fork. The fork. Notice the queen and the rook are forked. The king cannot capture the knight because of the bishop on c4 is supporting the knight. So this is a fork. And this is a very common fork. Now, I might add right here that black has a wonderful counterattack right here, right now. And if you'd like to know what black should do from this position, I will put a link at the end of the video. Now we're going to try an exercise. Look at this position. Go ahead and pause it if you have to get familiar with what's going on here. Black is slightly ahead. Black has 6 points, white has 5. Though white has the extra pawn, black has the rook. I'm going to tell you what white's plan is here. White's plan is to push his pawn on d2 straight up the board and get a queen. That's white's plan. Now I'm going to play a series of moves, and when I pause the video, you're going to have 3 seconds to tell me the next move. You are black. Look for forks. You ready? Here we go. Boom, you're in check. The black king is in check. You have 3 seconds. Look at the position. Tell me where to put the black king. Which square did you decide to put the black king? Did you choose this square here, forking the pawn and the knight? If you did, you would be wrong. Why is it wrong? Well, have a look. You chose to move here. What does white do? That's right. The knight forks your king and your rook. White is now going to win the game. If you get annoyed by knights, you're not alone. They can be so irritating. Look at this knight here. Now these are all the squares the knight is currently attacking. These are also all the squares this knight can move to on his next turn. Nothing special here. But what if I were to ask you, how many squares can this knight attack on his next turn? Watch this. Boom. Every one of these squares this knight will be able to attack on his next turn. So if you have rooks here, this knight can fork them. These rooks will be forked. 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 Then this knight can fork these rooks on his next turn. Can he fork these rooks? Well, notice every square with an X is white. What does that mean? I'm going to give you a little trick when dealing with knights, and this is really good in a blitz game. The knight is on a white square. His current square is white, and what that means is on his next turn, he will only be able to attack white squares. On a knight's next turn, he can only attack squares of the same color of square that he's on now. So when this knight makes a move, he will be attacking white squares. So look, one of those rooks is on a dark square, so we automatically know this white knight cannot possibly fork two pieces on different colored squares. All you got to do is look at the color of squares and you know instantly this knight cannot fork these rooks on its next turn. Why is this so handy? Well, go back to this position. We're playing a blitz game. We're playing fast, and the knight checks our king. Right? Our king is on a white square right now. The knight is on a dark square. When we move our king, we have to know that the moment we move our king to a dark square, that knight can probably attack the king again and call check again. Next stop on our double-decker bus tour. This is the statue of King Edward VII. King Edward VII was a king of Great Britain from 1901 until his death in 1910. His funeral on May 20th had the largest gathering of European royalty to ever take place. Kings of Spain, Denmark, Portugal, Norway, dozens of others. With that, let's start and introduce double attacks. Double attacks are different than forks. Now, some people are going to say that a double attack and forks are kind of the same thing, that a fork is a kind of double attack. Well, I believe in differentiating all the chess tactics, so we're not going to define a double attack as the same as a fork. Forks are different. Here we're going to look at a double attack. This bishop goes to c4 and attacks the king while the rook attacks the queen. Did you notice? The bishop moved out of the way and attacked the queen. That's called a discovery. And on our next lesson, we're going to learn all about discovered attacks. But you can see it here. This is a double attack. Look at this position. Again, another double attack. White bishop comes in, attacks the rook, while the white rook attacks the queen. Is this a good move? Well, be careful because, yes, it's a double attack. However, black can just take the rook and white loses the game. So keep in mind that make sure your double attacks are properly supported. And let's look at another one. Here, white has a very special kind of double attack called a double check. Double check is where two pieces check the king at the same time. Now here's a bedrock principle I want you to remember. There is no way to block a double check. When a king is in double check, the king must move. If you notice, the rook can grab this bishop. There's nothing guarding the bishop. The queen can grab the rook. There's nothing guarding that rook. But white is perfectly safe here. The black king has to move, and on white's next turn, he could attack the queen by putting his rook on a1. The bishop guards it. Or he could take his other rook and go up the board. He can check the king again. So white is perfectly safe in this position. Now let's look at a game played in 1925 by Grandmaster Gregory Levenfish versus Sergei von Freeman. I chose this game because it has a fantastic example of a double attack. Okay, we're going to pick up from towards the end of the game where Gregory takes this pawn on a sacrifice on h6, sacrificing his bishop. So pawn takes bishop, what else? And here, rook takes pawn, calls check on the king. Sergei moves his king and attacks the white rook. The rook is undefended, but here white has a double attack. Can you find the double attack by white? Take a few seconds. See if you can find the move. I'm going to give you a hint. Imagine if the white queen was right here in front of the king. If the white queen was right there, it would be checkmate. So now that you have this information, can you find the right move for white? Did you find bishop to b7? This is a fantastic double attack. 1, the black queen is being attacked by the bishop, and 2, the white queen is attacking the square g6. So here black lost his queen, and white went on to win the game. Our last stop on our trip through London is Simpson's on the Strand. This is a very fancy restaurant. You're going to need a lot of money to eat here. Some of the great masters of old have played here, including Paul Morphy and William Steinitz. And still today, many of the top players and grandmasters can be found sitting at its tables. And with that, let's look at our challenging position number 1. We've talked about forks and double attacks. Well, now's your chance to show us how much you know about forks. This is a tough one. It's white to move. Pause the video and try to find the best move for white. Were you able to find knight to e5? This is a fantastic move. In fact, it's the only winning move for white. Well, what's it doing? It's not forking pieces. This white knight is actually forking 2 squares. f7 and g6 are being forked. Now what's so big about these squares? Well, let's imagine a knight on f7. You can see what that is. That's a royal fork. Forks the queen and the king. But what about the other square? If we have a knight on g6, what's so special about that? Do we care about that pawn? No, the pawn doesn't mean anything. It's the square that means everything. Look at this rook on h1. And look at this pawn on h7. That pawn is pinned. Remember, we learned all about pins. If we had a knight on g6, calling check on the king, there's no way that pawn could take the knight. The rook slices this way, the bishop slices this way. That is checkmate. So the knight on g6 is checkmate. Go back to the original position, and you can see that knight to e5 is a very powerful move, forking 2 squares, not 2 pieces. And now for our last challenging position. The theme here is double attack. Again, it is white to move. White has a fantastic double attack in this position. Pause the video and find the best move for white. Were you able to find bishop to c2, skewering the queen and the rook? This is a great move. The queen can simply take the bishop? Yeah, but the problem is, look where that rook on a1 is attacking. The double attack is the square a8. Again, remember, squares can be attacked. Sometimes they're worth more than pieces. In this case, the square a8 is worth checkmate. If that rook lands on a8, the game is over. Black here cannot defend against both these attacks, so black is going to lose the queen. Black has to move the king out of the way, and now the queen falls. And even the black rook is now being attacked. White's going to win this game. And that's all we have. Thank you so much for watching our lesson on forks and double attacks. I hope you enjoyed our tour through London, England, and we'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.